if you have a standard of care expert who is at the top of their field, in the top 1% or the top 0.1% of their field, it might be hard for a jury to think that what this person is saying is what real physicians, reasonably careful physicians, actually do. This might be just kind of what comes from the ivory tower. And so standard care, at least in Illinois, and it's fairly similar language in most states from what I understand, is that the standard of care is what a reasonably well-qualified and a reasonably careful physician would do, if we're talking about physicians, in the same or similar circumstances, or something that a reasonably careful physician would not do under the same or similar circumstances. And so what I typically see is that plaintiffs will go out and get the best subject matter expert that they can find. And so they'll fly in someone who's like chief of medicine at Harvard, or over at Stanford, or in very high up either in academia, publishing prolifically, or high up in clinical medicine at a very prestigious academic medical institution. What defendants typically do is they'll get someone who's from in-state, from the same or a similar jurisdiction within the same state as the defendant doctor, who has reasonably similar qualifications as the defendant doctor. And so the last trial that I worked on involved a pediatric internist, or just a pediatrician. And so for the defense, they had called someone from a different county, but who was also primarily a practicing pediatrician. And so this person didn't have a ton of articles published in peer-reviewed journals, whereas the plaintiff's expert came from Boston at a prestigious institution there, had done significant amounts of research into the area, and seemed extremely well qualified. Now, this was a smaller jurisdiction that we were in, and so I do think that to an extent there was a little bit of distrust of an expert coming in from out of state, from a much larger city. So there was already a little bit of tension there. But I also think that there's something to be said for being able to put your mind or evaluate the decisions of the doctor from someone who has a similar level of experience as a doctor. And so in other words, what I think is important is if you have a standard of care expert who is at the top of their field, in the top 1% or the top 0.1% of their field, it might be hard for a jury to think that what this person is saying is what real physicians, reasonably careful physicians, actually do. This might be just kind of what comes from the ivory tower. And so when you have someone on the other side who comes in and says, I practice in a similar sized county with a similar sized patient population, and I have a similar caliber of education and experience, and says, this is what people like me do, I think that's really compelling. And so my recommendation is, I think that when you're or maybe not my recommendation, but at least something to consider, is when you're going out and selecting a standard of care expert, think about, are you getting an expert who's overqualified? I think on the other hand, what that lets you do is then it broadens the pool of prospective people, because there's only so many top of the field experts that could be out there. But if you're getting just any reasonably well-qualified physician in that particular specialty, it significantly opens up the pool of potential experts that you can choose. What that does is that lets you then go and find an expert not just on their credentials, but on their charisma, on their presentation. What are they going to look like in front of a jury, and how are they going to respond to intense cross-examination? So I think those are some things to consider, especially as a general rule, to think about the people who are at the top 1% or high off of the charts in terms of their academic and professional performance might not always be the most personable and communicative people that you can find. And so I think that if you think about, at least for your standard of care experts, finding someone that's a little bit more similar to your defendant doctor, I think that's going to be really helpful. That being said, I completely understand the idea that it's going to be hard for a plaintiff to find a doctor from the same county to testify against another doctor in that county in that same field. It's a small role, I get it. But let's say you're in a middle-sized Midwestern city. You can find another doctor from another similarly sized Midwestern city to be your standard of care expert. And so maybe you don't want to get the exact same level of credentials. Maybe you want to get someone that's head of the department in a smaller, like, community hospital. But that's something that I think that you should start considering before you go out and find the most well-credentialed and expensive expert that you can find. That, however, is completely different from your proximate cause expert. And in that situation, when you're talking about, did this alleged negligence actually proximately cause the injuries claimed, that's someone that you do want to make sure that you get the most qualified person you can. Well, but if you can find maybe the best qualified person in your state, I think that's kind of would help ease some of the tensions that you might find in a jury that might be a little bit wary of out-of-towners or people from out of state coming in to testify against doctors in their community. So that's just my quick food for thought for today. Sorry it's a little bit noisy here. I'm in an airport, just charging up my laptop. So just trying to get a little bit of electricity before my next flight. But I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments down below. And I look forward to talking with you down there. Thanks.